The St. Augustine Cathedral glowed under golden lights, crystal chandeliers casting dazzling reflections upon its towering arches. A solemn air filled the grand hall, where the city's most prestigious guests sat in quiet anticipation, waiting for this monumental moment. Today marked the wedding of Daniel Whitmore, a gifted surgeon, and Celeste Davenport, the beloved daughter of a wealthy aristocratic family. Everything was perfect, from the pristine white roses lining the aisle to the soft melody of the orchestra playing in the background. Daniel stood at the altar, his gloved hands tightening slightly. He was supposed to feel joy. This was the marriage everyone expected. Celeste was beautiful, sophisticated, the perfect match in the eyes of society. And yet, deep in his chest, a sense of unease stirred, impossible to ignore. The grand church doors swung open. Celeste entered, draped in a flawless white gown that hugged her poised frame. Her smile was radiant, filled with confidence. Daniel watched her glide toward him, but his heartbeat did not quicken. The rush of excitement he had always imagined a groom should feel never came. At the very back of the cathedral, Evelyn Carter sat in silence, her sharp gaze fixed on the scene before her. She did not belong here. She was not on the guest list, but she had every reason to be present. Clutched tightly in her hand was a manila envelope. Inside it lay a truth powerful enough to shatter everything. The minister's voice rang through the cathedral, solemn and clear. If anyone objects to this marriage, speak now or forever hold your peace. Silence fell over the congregation. Daniel inhaled deeply, preparing to speak his vows, but before he could utter a word, a voice rang out, breaking through the hallowed stillness. "I object." Gasps echoed through the church. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Daniel turned, his gaze locking onto a woman he had never seen before, Evelyn Carter. Celeste's grip on her bouquet tightened, her nails digging into the delicate lace. Evelyn stepped forward, her eyes never wavering from Daniel's. "You can't marry her," she declared, her voice steady, resolute. "Because everything you think you know about her is a lie." Daniel remained frozen. The unease he had felt all day finally had a name. A storm was coming. The entire cathedral fell into stunned silence. A low murmur spread through the crowd, growing louder with each passing second. Celeste spun around, her eyes wide with shock, but within moments her expression twisted into rage. Daniel stood frozen, his gaze locked onto the woman who had just shattered his wedding, Evelyn Carter. The minister's voice was firm, his frown deepening. "Miss, who are you and why do you object to this union?" Evelyn remained unshaken. She stepped forward, gripping the envelope in her hand. Hundreds of eyes bore into her, but she didn't waver. Her attention was on Daniel, on the man who had no idea his life was about to change forever. "I object because this marriage is built on a lie," she declared, her voice steady. "Celeste doesn't love you, Daniel. She never has." Celeste clutched her bouquet so tightly that the stems threatened to snap. "She's using you," Evelyn continued, unwavering, "and I have proof." Daniel's brows furrowed. For the first time since the ceremony began, the unease in his chest had a reason. "What the hell are you talking about?" Celeste let out a nervous laugh, though her voice lacked conviction. Evelyn lifted the envelope, then pulled out the contents. Photographs and documents she had spent months gathering. "Celeste has been having an affair with Lucas Whitmore," she said, scattering the photos onto the marble floor. The images fluttered down, revealing snapshots of Celeste and Lucas, Daniel's own cousin, locked in intimate moments. A few guests near the front gasped. A woman covered her mouth in shock. Daniel bent down, picking up one of the photos. His fingers clenched around it, his knuckles turning white. In the picture, Celeste leaned into Lucas, their faces mere inches apart, their eyes filled with a kind of affection Daniel had never seen in his own relationship. "Lies!" Celeste shrieked, but her voice faltered. "These photos are fake. Someone is trying to destroy our happiness." Evelyn didn't give her the chance. "These are Lucas's bank statements," she said, holding up a second set of documents. "This money was transferred from your joint account with Celeste into a hidden account under Lucas Whitmore's name. She hasn't just betrayed you, Daniel. She's been planning to take your family's inheritance." Celeste went rigid. The game was up. Daniel turned to his bride. His voice was quiet, but it carried an undeniable weight. "Tell me, Celeste, is it true?" Celeste said nothing. She couldn't. The proof was undeniable. Daniel studied her for a long moment. Then, with deliberate slowness, he removed his wedding band. Without a word, he placed it in Celeste's palm. "This wedding is over." A suffocating silence filled the room. Celeste's mouth opened as if to protest, but she knew it was useless. No one would believe her now. No one. And in a single afternoon, Celeste Davenport's carefully crafted dream crumbled into nothing. For the first time in his life, Daniel felt utterly lost. The weight of deception, the expectations of society, the life he thought he was supposed to live, all of it shattered in an instant. He turned to Celeste, but the love he was supposed to feel simply wasn't there. Then he turned to Evelyn, the woman who had just changed everything. Without thinking, he reached for her wrist. "Come with me." Evelyn gasped. She hadn't expected this reaction, but when she looked into his eyes, filled with determination yet shadowed with pain, she couldn't refuse. They ran out of the church into the soft drizzle. No one dared to stop them. No one knew what was happening. It was just Daniel and Evelyn escaping a wedding that had crumbled to dust. His car sped through the night, the city lights fading in the rearview mirror. Evelyn sat beside him, her heart pounding. "Where are we going?" she asked. Daniel kept his eyes on the road. "Somewhere I can breathe." The salty ocean air hit them as they arrived at a secluded beach. The waves rolled endlessly under the pale moonlight, whispering secrets only the sea could understand. Daniel stepped out, shedding his jacket, his expensive shoes abandoned in the sand. Evelyn hesitated, still sitting in the car. He turned to her. "Come. I don't want to be alone." Slowly, she stepped out. The cool sand pressed against her bare feet, the wind sending a shiver down her spine. They sat by the water's edge, watching the tide ebb and flow. For a long time, neither spoke. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "Why did you do it?" Evelyn took a deep breath. There was no reason to hold back now. "I was the planner for your wedding," she admitted. "I wasn't a stranger. My job was to make today perfect. But while doing that, I found out the truth." Daniel turned to her, listening intently. "Celeste never loved you," she said. "She only wanted your wealth. And if I had stayed silent, I would have to live with that guilt forever." She paused, her gaze distant. "I know what it's like, Daniel. My sister, she married someone like Celeste. A man who used her as a pawn, and when she found out the truth, she couldn't handle it." Her voice trembled. She didn't survive. Daniel's chest tightened. He couldn't fathom the pain she had endured. Evelyn turned to him, her eyes glistening under the moonlight. "I couldn't let it happen again." Daniel reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek. "Thank you." She shook her head. "I only did what was right." They sat in silence, the ocean wind wrapping around them. Then Daniel spoke, his voice low. "Stay with me tonight." Evelyn hesitated, but deep down, she knew she didn't want to leave. She nodded. "Okay." He pulled her close, his lips capturing hers in a kiss that started tender but quickly turned desperate. They made love right there in the sand, under the moon and the whispering waves. Their moans blended with the sound of the ocean, as if the tide itself was carrying away all their sorrow. Tonight, they were no longer strangers. They were two souls who had found each other in a world filled with deception and loss. Early morning, Evelyn's small apartment was eerily silent, save for the rhythmic ticking of the clock. She sat on the bathroom floor, her eyes locked onto the pregnancy test in front of her. Two bright red lines stared back at her, undeniable and absolute. She was pregnant. A wave of panic crashed over Evelyn. She had no idea what to do, no idea how to process this reality. Daniel. His name echoed in her mind like a distant whisper. It had been 6 weeks since that fateful night, and she had avoided him ever since. Not because she didn't want to see him, but because she was terrified. terrified of his reaction, terrified of what he might say, or worse, what he wouldn't say. Her phone had rung countless times over the past few weeks. Daniel had tried reaching her again and again, but she never answered. But she couldn't run anymore. Now, standing in front of Daniel's upscale apartment, Evelyn clenched the fabric of her coat, trying to steady her trembling hands. She took a deep breath and knocked on the door. Seconds passed. Then, the door swung open. Daniel stood there, his shirt half-buttoned, his hair slightly disheveled, as if he had just woken up. But the moment he saw her, his expression sharpened. "Evelyn." His voice was low, carrying a mix of surprise and frustration. Evelyn swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay calm. "We need to talk." She took a deep breath before finally saying the words that had haunted her for weeks. "Daniel, I'm pregnant." The room fell into suffocating silence. Daniel didn't move. It was as if her words had yet to fully register. Evelyn clenched her fists, bracing herself for whatever was about to come next. She had told him the truth. Now, everything depended on Daniel. Daniel's apartment was steeped in silence. Evelyn stood before him, her eyes shimmering with uncertainty, her fingers gripping the hem of her coat. Daniel remained motionless, her words still echoing in his mind. She was pregnant. He inhaled deeply, then stepped toward her. "Evelyn, are you sure?" She nodded, her fingers twisting together as if she was holding herself together. Daniel studied her for a long moment. Then suddenly, the words left his lips before he could stop them. "Marry me." Evelyn froze. Then she let out a quiet laugh, one devoid of amusement. "Daniel, you don't have to do this." His brows furrowed. "This isn't about obligation. You're carrying my child. We can raise them together." Evelyn shook her head. "You don't owe me anything. I can take care of myself." A strange emotion swelled in Daniel's chest, one that felt suspiciously like fear. Not fear of responsibility, but fear of her walking away, of her facing this alone. "I don't want you to do this alone." His voice softened, raw and honest. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Evelyn sighed. "We can make an agreement. I'll move in, but with no strings attached." Daniel's brows drew together. "What do you mean?" She met his gaze head-on, unwavering. "No love, Daniel. I don't want anything beyond co-parenting." Daniel clenched his fists, but after a moment he nodded. "Fine, if that's what you want." Evelyn said nothing more, but deep down she knew. Setting boundaries wouldn't stop a heart from crossing them. The first few days of living together, they both tried to keep their distance. Evelyn reminded herself this was just an arrangement, nothing more. But the more time she spent around Daniel, the more she realized he wasn't as distant as she once thought. He took care of her in quiet ways, always remembering that she liked chamomile tea at night, always placing a steadying hand on her back as they walked down the stairs. Daniel, too, couldn't ignore Evelyn. She was strong yet soft in ways that disarmed him. He found himself waiting for the little moments, a fleeting smile, an accidental brush of their hands. Between them, something beyond responsibility was slowly growing, something neither of them was ready to admit. The storm raged violently that night, winds howling like a beast unleashed, rain hammering against the windows with relentless fury. But no force of nature could compare to the fear gripping Daniel's chest. Evelyn clutched her belly, her face drained of all color. "Daniel, something's wrong." Her voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the air like a blade. Without hesitation, Daniel scooped her into his arms and rushed into the storm. Rain soaked them instantly, the wind tearing at his clothes, but nothing mattered except getting her to the hospital. As he drove through the near-blinding rain, one hand gripped the steering wheel, the other clutching hers. "Stay with me, Evelyn. Don't you dare close your eyes." She tried to smile, though it was weak. "You're worried about me?" Daniel didn't answer. He just drove faster. By the time they reached the hospital, everything turned into a nightmare. Doctors rushed Evelyn into emergency care, and Daniel stood frozen in the hallway, his heart hammering in his chest. "The baby is only 30 weeks. We need to perform an emergency C-section." The words hit Daniel like a tidal wave. Time slowed, minutes stretching into eternity. And then, a baby's cry pierced the silence. A single, fragile sound, but it shattered Daniel's entire world. A doctor stepped out, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. "It's a girl," the doctor announced. Daniel's breath caught. He reached out, hesitantly, as if afraid she would disappear. "She's so small," he whispered. But before he could rush in to see Evelyn, a piercing alarm blared. Doctors and nurses scrambled back into the operating room. A nurse grabbed Daniel's arm. "She's hemorrhaging!" Daniel's world shattered. The joy of his daughter's birth was instantly drowned in terror. Evelyn no longer felt pain. She no longer heard the beeping of machines or the frantic voices. Instead, she was surrounded by warmth, an ethereal light that embraced her gently, weightlessly. Then she saw her, Claire. Her sister stood there, just as she had been in Evelyn's memories. Her smile soft, her presence calm and unwavering. Evelyn's throat tightened. "Claire!" Claire reached forward, her touch warm against Evelyn's skin. "It's time to go back, Evelyn. They're waiting for you." Images flickered through Evelyn's mind. Daniel, his desperate eyes, his hand gripping hers in the storm. And her child, the daughter she had yet to hold. "Is she okay?" Evelyn asked, her voice trembling. Claire nodded. "She's waiting for you." The light around her dimmed, the warmth beginning to fade. Claire whispered one last time, "Live, Evelyn, love." And then she was falling back into the world she had almost left behind. Daniel sat motionless beside her hospital bed, his fingers interwoven with hers. 3 days. 3 days of watching her motionless form, waiting for a sign, waiting for hope. He had spent his life controlling everything, his career, his emotions, his future. But now, none of it mattered. Not when the woman he loved lay there, still and silent. For the first time in his life, Daniel Blackwood understood what it meant to be truly powerless. He bowed his head, whispering a prayer to a God he wasn't sure he believed in. "Please, don't leave me." Then, a movement. Daniel's breath hitched. "Evelyn?" Slowly, her eyelids fluttered open. He froze. For a moment, he couldn't even believe it. Then, as if something inside him shattered, tears spilled silently down his face. He didn't care about pride, didn't care about control. All that mattered was this: she was alive. He tightened his grip on her hand, leaning down until his forehead nearly touched hers. His voice broke, raw and unfiltered. "I love you, Evelyn." For the first time the words left his lips, no hesitation, no fear. Evelyn gazed up at him, tears slipping from the corners of her own eyes. A weak yet radiant smile formed on her lips. Outside, the storm had passed. But in their hearts, something else had just begun. A storm of love, of emotions too powerful to be denied any longer. 3 years had passed, and Blackwood Haven was no longer a quiet, somber estate. It was filled with laughter, the pitter-patter of tiny feet, and the warmth of a family that had grown together. Evelyn stood on the porch, watching their daughter, Lily, now 3 years old, twirling through the garden, chasing butterflies with boundless energy. "Mommy, look at me," Lily called, holding up a tiny wildflower with pure delight. Evelyn smiled. "That's beautiful, sweetheart." From behind her, a pair of strong arms wrapped around her waist. Daniel leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to her hair. "Are you ready? I have a surprise for you two." That afternoon, Daniel drove them to the beach, the very place where everything had begun 3 years ago. The storm, the heartbreak, but also the night they had found each other amidst the chaos. Evelyn stepped barefoot onto the sand, feeling the cool waves brush against her ankles. When she turned back, she found Daniel down on one knee, a small velvet box resting in his palm. Lily clapped excitedly. "Daddy, what are you doing?" Daniel chuckled, his eyes filled with both certainty and tenderness. "Something I should have done properly a long time ago." He opened the box, revealing a delicate ring, the small stone glistening under the golden hues of the setting sun. The first time I proposed to you, it was out of duty. But this time, I'm doing it for only one reason, because I love you, and because I can't imagine my life without you in it." Evelyn felt her heart tighten, a lump forming in her throat. She placed her hand over his heart and whispered, "One step at a time, together." Daniel smiled, pulling her into his arms. Under the golden sky, with the laughter of their daughter filling the air, they sealed their promise with a kiss, a new beginning, a love unshaken by any storm, and a future that was finally, beautifully whole. Happiness, at last, was complete.